This is Lauren Etheridge here, and Lauren's a member of our developer relations team and particularly focused on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. So it's really great to have you, Lauren, on the team, and really excited to have you host this panel today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We had to do some height adjustments because I'm very short. So that's what we were doing. When I first came over here, you couldn't see me at all.
All right. Well, the cheers for standing desks or adjustable cameras, whichever the case may be. But I
Indeed.
think everybody else is here. So shall we pull up the rest of our panel?
Let's do this. Yay. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
All right. So, welcome, everyone. As TG said, I'm Lauren Deverell at Sanity. I think we're going to have a great discussion. Our panelists are in a unique position to discuss sort of great editing tools and how they empower teams, and specifically how they work to create delightful editor experiences. So joining us today is Tatiana Mack. Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly, Tatiana?
Hi there. I'm Tatiana. Thank you for having me. I use they, she pronouns. I am currently an independent software engineer working at Loom and helping with building out their marketing website as well as a marketing brand design system. I also maintain an open source dictionary called Self-Defined and kind of an open source and data nerd. So very excited to be here. Thank you. Oh, and I'm based in Portland, Oregon.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Andriana?
Is that me, Andrea?
Yes, Andrea. Sorry.
No, no worries. Hello, I'm Andrea Humble. I work at Figma. I'm a brand strategist. Prior to that, I was heading up our website, marketing website, still deeply involved with the web team and building out all of our experiences there. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. And Carolina.
Hi there. I'm a solution engineer here at Sanity, so I work closely with our enterprise clients on helping them make the most out of their structured content platform. I also am a bit of a data nerd and come from a variety of media production and academia, so I have a varied experience. So excited to hear about your guys' use case, but also talk about what we see at Sanity too.
Excellent. So before Canute and the design and engineering team gave us that wonderful demo, we heard from Simon and Carrie, and they sort of talked about the intersection between what the audience needs and the capacity of the content team to maintain that content, and also what developers and design teams can support. What I found particularly interesting about their talk and sort of thought-provoking was the idea that sort of communicating intentions rather than solutions as a way to think about collaboration, particularly amongst multidisciplinary teams. So feel free to comment about any of that, but I thought we could start off by talking about each of your process for ensuring editors' needs are reflected in their authoring or editing tools. Does anyone want to take that first?
I can jump in.
Excellent, Andrea.
Something that we talk about a lot is when we kick something up with a stakeholder within our marketing team, oftentimes it's sort of, here's what I want to do. And we cover what folks are trying to do, but then we try to uncover like, what is the ideal customer journey here that we want people to go through? So where are we actually trying to lead people to? Are there CTAs involved? Do we want them to go on to discover more content next? How discoverable does this content need to be? Or are we actually driving folks to it directly? And all of that shapes what we end up building in the end. And I am constantly holding two end users in my mind. One is the author of the content and the person who actually needs to use this authoring platform. And then the other is the person consuming the content and how they are digesting it themselves and experiencing, because when they experience any sort of content that we put out there, they're experiencing our brand. And so how is this a good reflection of our brand is something that I'm constantly thinking about. So ease of use for our end users, flexibility, extensibility, and then of course that in sort of brand touch point are all top of mind for us.
I'm reminded of what Carrie said in the last panel as well, that what are you actually trying to do is the question. I think a lot of times people come to Sanity saying, I need new marketing pages, but actually that's not the problem. The actual problem is people don't really know what we're about, or people aren't spending enough time, or people aren't engaged with us. So I think actually getting at that deeper question is a hard process, and I'm not one I have always have the answers to, but it sounds like it's similar at Figma.
Yeah.
I think that the approach I generally take is thinking about first, what is the current landscape? A lot of my work, especially because I do work independently, is coming into teams with where they're at and getting a lay of the land. And also often when we take a look at what was there, there is a lot that was working. And I think that can often be lost sight when we are upgrading into newer systems. So maintaining what was working and then looking to what would help, what is the challenge to what Andrea said about users. What are our users looking for that they're not able to find? And then seeing Sanity specifically here as the way to empower the content owner, which is what I lovingly refer to the people who are building within Sanity. What does the content owner need in order to accomplish that? I think one of the things I'm most excited about with references and some of the cool features that you all are rolling out is the ability to create evergreen content across all of the pages, that we are starting to look at not only content less as a linear narrative, in the vertical being the landing page, but looking at content as being a horizontal, that each touch point, whether it be a stronger CTA lower down into the funnel or an earlier touch point at a higher point in the funnel, we're able to create that content as a component and as a reference within Sanity. And then content owners are empowered to add that within different content blocks. So they know their audience best. And that removes the engineer from having to be, I think, honestly, somewhat of a gatekeeper from being the owner of that narrative and empowering your content team.
Is it difficult to get editors to think in terms of that journey? I think a lot of times getting out of that page by page mindset. So, I want to change my about page. I want to go to one place for it. I think that I'm always worried that I'm building an experience that might not be like legible to editors in that way.
Yeah. So how do you, sort of bridge that gap and work on sort of a shared vocabulary between sort of content owners or content editors and developers?
I can jump off of that to continue my thought, which is that I find that whenever I can get multiple people who are looking at our platform through a different lens to use shared vocabulary, especially as a dictionary maintainer, I'm just all about words and vocabulary, but getting us to own that vocabulary and tying it into existing systems. So some of the work I'm really excited about sitting at the intersection of data and the design system is when we're building a new component, how would this be built in Sanity? What are the components that the content owners might already be accustomed to? Where might this live in the studio? Where might this surface in the different levels of the pages? I don't necessarily think we always have to explain the minutia at all points. Not something I struggle with. I'm like an over explainer. But if they still are thinking about things in pages, that's okay. But as they start to get within the layers of those pages, then you can dive deeper and deeper and show them how to update each of those individual components as the time comes. It's all about timing.
Yeah, it's similar for us. We use a system of components. We have a design system that we call Flegos, which is Figma Legos smushed together. And inside of there, we have a series of modules that can really be put together in any combination, any form to make a page of any kind. And so people have gotten really familiar. It's taken a lot of coaching, but people have really gotten familiar to the shared language of it's not quite atomic design. It's bubbled up a little bit from that, but it is founded on the same principles, and so people have started to adopt that language as they think of content. So like we think about it as these components and the structured content, but like they're just thinking of, I need a message, I need some words, I need an image, and I need a CTA, and like that's the frame that they're coming from. So how do I take that thinking and put it into a shared language of components, architecture, things like that, and we kind of meet in the middle, which has been really helpful.
And so did either of you do any specific training around this vocabulary or these concepts to sort of get people used to it, or did you feel like people learned it through osmosis? Because I think part of what Carolina does and the solution engineering team is providing, sort of that foundation concept knowledge to enterprise clients.
Yeah,
I think it's
I've
always
done
really
some
specific
informal
to
trainings.
each enterprise too. Sorry, continue, please.
No, I'm sorry. I've done some informal trainings with my team. Just sort of sit down as we're kicking off a project and walk them through the basics of our design system. But we don't do. We're small enough that we can really sort of transfer this knowledge on a project by project basis. That's definitely going to change as we're growing. So we do need to think about how we actually do formalize this transmission of knowledge.
Something that is really helpful about working at Loom specifically is everyone's really ingrained in using the Loom platform. So a lot of the training materials I create asynchronously by recording Looms. And I always try to keep them, this is just me being me, but I try to keep them agnostic. So even if it's like, Rachel or whatever, there's no one named Rachel, I don't think. So I just made that up. Because someone at Loom's like, Rachel, which Rachel? Rachel might ask for something, but then I try to record the Loom in a way that's agnostic and gives them reference back to, if you are watching this Loom and you don't know how to log in, go and watch this Loom. So having a platform like Loom is really helpful in order to create some ongoing training materials where I can demo it very quickly in a few minutes and then link them out to any documentation, whether it be on Sanity's homepage or within our own, Notion hub. I found that to be really effective. I'm all about training people as they need it, because I think I've done long-term trainings and people are just like, after an hour, they're like, I don't want to listen to you anymore. I don't care. Like, yes, it's the glaze. Exactly.
It sounds like you're setting really strong foundations as well. Have you seen kind of a spread of the usage of like this language and platform? And Flagos, I think, is a good example that started at one place and seemed to like become through osmosis or through Looms or whatever, sort of more widespread through the organization. Have you seen sort of this way of thinking about content or these content systems also spreading across teams or across people?
I absolutely have. I think it's kind of a fun sociological experiment to see how different words that we create, especially within the little working group that's starting to build this new design system. We've done, I think, a really great job of making sure we're understanding the words we're using and documenting them into a place. But then as we spread them and use them amongst our teams, it's definitely osmosis is a great word for it. I think the tech industry is very good about taking and adopting different terms. I laugh because you can hear every tech TikToker, I just laugh about I'm going to double click on that. Let me circle back. All of those words and the way in which we're so good at manifesting that kind of language, we can use that same psychological tendency to talk about our systems. So yeah, same idea.
Yeah, Flagos was something that we just kind of came up with for fun, but I think actually giving it this internally branded name and something for people to call it was actually a fun way for people to grab onto it and sort of feel like they were a part of something.
Right. It's a way to sort of get that, connection and buy into it. I find that really helps, particularly when you're doing, introducing new concepts or introducing really just a new way of thinking. Having something that people can sort of latch onto is always super helpful.
I'm curious what the biggest issue was as a solutions engineer, I guess I'm always looking in search of problems. So what was the biggest issue in adopting a new mindset or changing your team from kind of a more traditional way of thinking about content or references or anything that's really part of the Sanity experience, or even just structured content experience? Was there a big hurdle to get over?
The first question I was asked by everyone when I said that we were moving to Sandy was, am I going to have to write Markdown? And I was like, no. And they're like, do whatever you want. Carry on. I don't care. So that was a big hook right then and there. That got folks on board pretty quickly. And then in terms of our actual system and how we think about content and how we think about content types, the biggest issue is always people want more, right? So you have a few and you start with your basic set, and then of course you find use cases that are going to extend your needs. And so we need to think about when is the right time to add to the system, and what warrants adding to it versus where should we actually know we can actually take your goals can be met by our existing systems that we have. So really finding this nice balance of figuring out when is the right time to extend what it is that we can do and what we're offering, and when is the right time to actually modify the content itself to fit the system.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
No, go ahead, Tatiana.
I echo a lot of the similar challenges there. I think that anytime with this shift, the main shift happened before I arrived, but I think a lot of the implementation from the previous system was something that I got to explore. And I think the biggest challenge I personally face is figuring out how to offer enough, but not too much in terms of editor ownership and power. Because I think there can be a point where you're building features that are almost too rich because Sanity is so malleable and so composable. I encountered this like existential crisis of, oh, should I give them access to this feature and this feature and this feature? And oh no, I need to write functions in order to make. And so I think that the scaling and the scalability isn't the issue. It's a matter of knowing when to activate those scalability levers that make sense for the team and the team's needs. I think that balancing that with knowing I am going to at some point face some technical debt is really honestly difficult for me to decide, and something I try to surface with the team in a very honest conversation. Like, we can take the time to build this now and inherit some of this technical debt and bank it as technical savings, which is one of the terms I'm trying to get used in our industry. But banking some technical savings now, which will take us a bit of time, but then it might allow us to grow. The challenge with that when you're working in a fast-paced vertical like marketing is you might be building something you never use. So those are all of the considerations, and I'm certainly not perfect at it, and I'm always learning.
Some of these possible sources of technical debt and/or technical savings, would those be like integrations, customizations, like cool things that you're building out custom to your studio? Okay.
Yeah, I think the composability of references is really amazing. I remember like even months ago prior to, you all are always upgrading. So I think this was like Sanity, like 12 or something. And I was kind of facing a wall of being able to nest different references. And now that I no longer face those walls, I'm like, oh, I could compose everything down into a Sanity schema. But sometimes that's impractical to do that because that might be a one-off usage and you might never come back to it. So it doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's too much of a good thing, I guess.
Yeah. I think also, that is something where, what Simon and Carrie were talking about, where, you really want to have this collaboration between content and designers and developers by communicating intention. And I think if you communicate intention rather than, I need this specific thing, or I want this thing to solve my problem, you get a much more like richer, open dialogue. And you get, I think there's ability for more collaboration in terms of, I'm trying to think of an example, but I can't right now, but just communicating like, what is this thing that you want supposed to do? I think it makes it easier for people who are, have different tasks within the team to sort of digest.
I think that balancing, I totally agree with everything you just said, Lauren. And I think also balancing that with giving them I like to think of it as a dim sum cart. I'm very food motivated, but it's like giving them that dim sum cart of like, what can you think of in terms of possibilities? Because many folks don't necessarily know, or maybe through work trauma have been conditioned to not ask for a lot. And one of Loom's values, I think, is asking for more. And so encouraging your team to both ask for more and to also understand when maybe more might not be 100% now, but might be 50% now, 100% later. I think striking from those two sides really helps you to make sure that you're always shooting for the stars and also not overbuilding.
Yeah, the work conditioning is really interesting. It always makes me a little sad when people come to the table and they're like, well, I know you don't have a lot of time, so let's just do this little thing. And I'm like, well, hold on. what's the opportunity at hand? Because we'll make the time for the right opportunities. So let's prioritize where we think we're going to have the most impact, and go from there. Like, let's not make any assumptions around who has time for what, because we should all be putting our time toward the things that are going to have the most impact.
Definitely. And I think, putting, even though everyone is pressed for time, that's a real thing, but, putting the work up front into, working through some things that may down the line end up solving a whole host of things, that time is well spent rather than having this sort of putting out individual fires.
I think that a lot. I think. No, continue. I'll go after you.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that I recently learned about that I think has contextualized a lot of this is the difference between ask versus guess culture. And that is a phenomenon that happens generationally. I think different generations within American culture fall into ask versus guess. But it also, if you work on a remote distributed team, ask versus guess culture is also like regionally cultural. So when you're thinking about something like asking for more features or guessing, you start to see people who, when they're guessers, they're not going to ask you for something that may be helpful to them. So navigating that, I always find to be a really interesting, again, sociological challenge. A lot of us are conditioned. I think peers that I've encountered in my career tend to be guessers.
I think people are very nervous about cost, right? About if I ask for this thing, it's going to be like either a ton of time or a ton of cost or a ton of developer hours. I think it's hard to make that. It's not a linear calculation, I don't think. Like this sort of initial effort will save you lots of time in the future, possibly, but you never know, right? So I think it's a matter of making that educated, I guess it's an educated guess that you ask for and to combine the two approaches.
I think it requires the permission to say no. That part of extending more asking is also extending the offer of being able to say no, or no, not now, or maybe this instead.
Yes. I think, yeah, you have to be able to say no. And particularly like sometimes, particularly when people, I think, discuss with like, or they lead with a possible solution, like being able to say, well, no, but let's think about this, or here's something else we could do, is, I think, most people receive that very well.
It's like what you said about motivations. Getting to people's motivations is really helpful.
Yes.
Do you find it's easier to sort of make a small change towards things? Like I'm thinking about sort of different feature sets, for example, even in Sanity, like you were mentioning, adding sort of nested references, which is kind of a macro level, but there is also the idea of maybe, encoding metadata in pieces of portable text, which is a lot smaller and not as intrusive, for example. Do you find that you have kind of a testing, like a first sort of stab at something, see how people respond, see how it works, and then move on to sort of greater reconfigurations of content?
Yeah, I think that one of the testing aspects that I'm most excited about right now is very small in terms of the actual code, but big in terms of the possibility. So I referenced that we're building a design system. So encoding the design system and creating a connection between, say, the design system colors and a specific Sanity object, and then testing where that might make sense, right? And getting the design and brand input into what are the rules around this? How much flexibility are we granting to the content owner here? I think that with that testing also has to come the acceptance of retiring certain things that don't work and removing them from your code base when they don't.
Yeah, same for us. I mean, effort doesn't equal impact. Certain things can be very small to work on. We can spend an hour on them, and it can unlock teams to do all manner of things. A great example of that was we have these forms, but right now they're modals. They live behind a click, and a bunch of people were asking for like very different things. But when I listened to it, I was like, oh, you all just need exposed forms to live in a Lego type. Got it. And so, our lead developer, Corey, spent, 2 hours working on this. And I just unlocked 3 different teams to go do things that they've been waiting to do for like months. So, it was very small in terms of effort, but huge in terms of what the impact for other folks to be able to enable to go and do the things that they need to do.
I'm always excited to hear about exposed forms that aren't behind a modal. So kudos.
Same.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Sounds like there was some pattern matching there too, which I feel like is a big part of sort of identifying structured content, right? Saying,
Right.
okay, this thing is kind of like this thing, and your problem is kind of like this problem.
Exactly. Like none of the folks I were talking to came and said like, "Hey, Andrew, I really need exposed forms." Like they were all coming with like different bits of information and different problems that they were trying to solve. But when you listen and stop and think about it, you're like, "Oh, okay. There's a theme here, and here's how we can solve it for all of you." It's not always that magical, but in that particular instance, it was.
I think that a lot of our work is like entirely like a Mary Kate and Ashley mystery. That it's like low level like detective work, walking around and being like, "What do you think about this? What do you think about this?" And some days I'm Mary Kate, sometimes I'm Ashley, but it is a lot of the work is connecting dots, right?
Now I'm curious, what's the win that you're proudest of? Like, what is like the most successful anecdote of like this detective story having a happy ending? You find the knife or whatever.
I think it's being able to get the team to think about the design system and the data architecture as symbiotic, and to reframe ownership. Before this, in prepping for this, I drew a diagram of data at the center with information architecture, the CMS, and hard code, and that in those three different models or three different aspects, the owner shifts, right? When it's hard coded, the owner, rather gatekeeper, is often the engineer. And when the data is in the CMS, that shifts the ownership into the content owner. And I think unlocking that aspect of content ownership and empowerment is the biggest win for me. That it's not that I'm there to like gatekeep what you're able to do. It's that I'm there to help empower you and to give you tools to do more than you thought you could.
I can think of a small one recently that felt very big, which is we're going through the process of localization right now and getting all of our content ready for localization, which is huge. And I was in a meeting with somebody, and a content owner who was not me said, "Right, but don't forget we need to consider localization." Yes.
It's really fun to be fed back things that you've said to other people.
Absolutely. Well, when other people start taking it on as their responsibility too,
yes.
and they start to see
Yes.
like,
Yes.
oh, all this fits into my remit and what I care about because we care about it. Like it all comes together as a whole.
And I think
Yes.
it goes back to what we spoke about at the beginning: a shared language, shared interests, shared
Right.
motivations. So that's
Exactly. So
Sounds like that circled back to you. Sorry.
I wasn't trying to, but yeah.
So I think we're getting close to time, but I wanted to ask if you had any particular, like one or two pieces of advice for people who are trying to have successful communication between developers and content folks, or, you know, some combination of folks in those type roles on a team together.
I think that always asking about, first of all, if any permutation of 2 or 3 people, the first question I love to ask is, who are we missing in the room? Because if you are content and engineering, then you're probably missing design and product management. So not to say that every meeting has to have 7 people, but even just considering what might we want to follow up with those individuals after. What are some of the needs they've expressed to us in past meetings? So that's question number 1. I would also say that question number 2 is, going back to what you said, Lauren, is what are your motivators? What's driving you to do this? What will success look like for you? And then my favorite question is, what pressures are you under? That question will unlock a lot from other people, because often the pressure they pass on to you is pressure that has been passed on to them. There's some inheritance there. And so identifying what that is allows you to travel all the way upstream and see if there's actually a broader problem that you all should be looking towards instead, that you might be solving that problem downstream when you should be solving it upstream with some upstream folks.
Fantastic.
I echo all of that, and I just add one little thing, which is a very small language shift, which is, what are our goals? Not what are your goals, but what are our goals? What are we trying to do? What will success look like for us? I think that can just change the tone a lot.
Fantastic. That's all great questions.
I love the inclusivity of it too. I think like often I'll be on a call with a team and be like, we're making all this for a content person, but I haven't spoken to a single content person yet. I have no idea what they need. So that happens surprisingly frequently. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are asking that question.
Yeah, awesome. I think we are maybe out of time.
It's hard to tell.
Yes, there's TG.
Hey, but that was so
I'm
awesome.
so envious of your robe.
Oh,
I know.
we got it. Okay, well, you get a robe. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Andrew too. Why not?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I know. I feel not cozy enough over here. You're really bringing the cozy.
That's the whole
We
vibe.
have this
We're
nice
just vibing.
waffle weave. It's like very Scandi.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's very comfortable.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, it is great. I think I speak for everyone in our company. Just I'm seeing the Slack, as you do when you have these events, you have your Slack channel, everybody's talking, everyone's just gushing over this panel. I mean, it was just an amazing conversation. And thank you to Lauren and Carolina for shepherding it in such an awesome direction as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks so much for asking me.
Yeah, thanks for having us and for the great conversation. I have a lot to think about.
Nice meeting you.
Yes. Awesome. Hope we see you soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.